94.7 The Pulse in Geelong. My name's Rob Cameron on the line now. Bronte Price, he's a regular on the show. He talks about all issues in the LGBTQI plus community. Bronte, good morning and welcome back.
Good morning. Thanks, Rob.
Great to have you back. I was thinking of you, a couple of posts you made recently in social media about the joy of the role you have in being a marriage celebrant. And I went to a wedding on the weekend, and it doesn't really matter who it is, where it is, whether it's gay, straight or different. The joy of a wedding is something to behold. It must be a real privilege for you to do this job.
It is a privilege, and every wedding you do, you hope is different, and it matters very much to the couple and their family and friends, and you don't want to mess it up. And it's always joyful. They understand how important the institution of marriage is, and finally they get to declare their love publicly in front of however many friends and family are there, and it's always joyful. And you never lose sight of the fact that this is a privileged, kind of honourable job. I think it's very good.
And you have been able to, celebrate marriages for people that have found it very, very difficult to do it in other forms. And again, that must be even more joyous because you're a conduit to something that is very rarely available to people, and that's pretty special.
Yeah, thanks. So I did a wedding in Blairgowrie on the weekend, and it was between two young women, and they included a bit of a political statement in there, and it just it included words around the fact that we needed people there to understand that many from the LGBTIQ plus community died waiting for the legal right to get married. And so after the ceremony, this complete stranger, one of their guests, came up and just shook my hand and said, from a straight guy to a gay guy, he said, I just wanted to say that ceremony was fantastic. And he said, that bit where you said about people died waiting to get married was something I'd never thought of before, and it made me tear up. So it was, joy comes in many forms, but it's also an opportunity, I think, sometimes to just do a little bit of education and remind people that, this has just been 5 years. I think Friday was the date when marriage equality became law in Australia, and we don't ever take that for granted.
And I was moved by that. I hadn't realised it was so quick. 5 years ago. It's very fast when you get to our age, Bronte, and it has moved fast. And to my knowledge, the sky hasn't fallen in, and no one has been caused any great inconvenience. But my goodness, it's brought so much joy and happiness to so many people since that decision was made. And I guess it's opened the door for a lot of other potential change around laws and community opinions around this, simply by the fact that this was supposed to be the end of the earth, some people thought, but it's done nothing but make it a better place to live. So are you optimistic now that other change in the future may happen a little more quickly than otherwise would have?
Yeah, I think so. I think the marriage equality being signed into law has been a bit of a catalyst. And you're right, it's not just the couple who are there getting married. There's at least a minimum of two other people there who are their legal witnesses, and often, family or chosen family and friends. And so it affects everyone, and who's at the wedding, and it enables those other conversations to occur about, well, gee, what are the next things that need to happen? And those conversations are now, I think, gathering momentum, gathering pace, and they're taking place, and people are understanding that this, what has been put in place in the past is just wrong. It's just unfair, and it's got to change, which is really cool. So I think you're right. The signing into law of marriage equality has been a massive bonus for the entire community, but especially the LGBTIQ plus community.
One of those other changes you're advocating for, as I mentioned earlier, is around lifeblood and people who are restricted from donating blood because of some of these rules that at the time I thought were were sensible, practical and necessary, but they were 40 years ago, and the world's changed a hell of a lot, and your community is still being treated poorly, I suppose. How is the change coming there? Because obviously you've got to get through some pretty old-fashioned ideals to make the changes to allow gay men to donate blood.
Yeah, so it's and it's not just gay men; it's people who are bisexual and trans as well. People who are perhaps gender diverse, and so but it particularly focuses on gay men, and so it asks questions when you donate blood at Lifeblood or Red Cross. You actually get asked in the last 3 months, have you had sexual activity with male-to-male sex, with or without a condom? And we understand back in the 1980s and 90s that was a reasonable question to ask. It's not now for people who have been in long-term monogamous relationships or people who are on a medication called PrEP, which prevents the transmission of HIV. And so the policy has been pretty slow to change. I'm not sure there's a hunger yet for the policy to change, but at the same time, there's a lot of people in the LGBTIQ plus community who have good blood, who are willing to donate and just aren't able to if they've had sex with another male, in this case, in the last 3 months. And so the steps really need to be, it's with the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and I know that there are certainly some LGBTIQ plus activists and advocates and some MPs who are starting to put pressure on, the TGA to change the policy and just let it happen. It's happened. It's been overturned in 9 or 10 other countries, and even some of the smaller countries such as Lithuania, Slovenia, are now thinking about changing it. And you just think, well, if they can do that, why can't we do that? So it just needs some debate and common sense and contemporary thinking, I think.
Yeah, and I think that it's probably happening in a lot of cases, but of course there's still pushback and notable pushback from some areas still within the political system. But on the back of what we're talking about, the change has shown people that everything remains pretty much normal and life isn't affected. The ability to advocate for this, where do people in your position who are putting up the case, where do you start to get the best impact, do you think?
Yeah, I think you one of the things that is working really quite well, I think, is to lobby sympathetic MPs, both federally and state-based, and get the conversation starting to happen. There's also, the ability to set up various polls and just get a groundswell, if you will, of support through petitions that you can then take to the politicians. So the politicians are obviously the ones who make and amend law, just as they did with the Marriage Act 1961, and they, just need to do the same with a few other issues happening at the moment. And this is one of them, but the gay blood ban is one of them.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of politicians who have been progressive and have been openly progressive on these issues, and you probably don't need to work too hard to get them on side. It's some of the other politicians, and I think there's certainly members of the Labor Party that are looking to be more progressive and catch on to younger voters and more modern thinking. But I suppose that's it. Where do you put your energy? Because you could spend a lot of time banging your head against the wall in the wrong place. You've just got to find the right people to carry your flag.
You can go down lots of little rabbit holes, I think, exactly. So it's a matter of finding out who is an ally in Parliament and, heading their way with an email. That works. And if they don't have the responsibility for that. They'll certainly pass it on to someone who does. There are now, the major parties have now got spokespeople for the queer community, which is really, really good. And there's some independents, of course, who are terrific allies for the LGBTIQ plus community.
Bronte, let's look at the year that was. Have you, we wind down, we've only got 3 weeks to go and it's all over and another year starts. If you had to do a little bit of review of 2022, from where you sit as an individual citizen, but an advocate for your cause at a time where the discussions do cause some angst, how do you think the year's gone?
I think it's been a productive year, a joyful year. Victoria opened its Pride Centre in St Kilda. It's a place, a physical place, a building that sort of holds events. It has various businesses, queer-owned businesses in there, and it has places where people can just meet and work together, have meetings and so on. And it also has become kind of the one-stop shop for advocacy for the LGBTIQ plus community, and it's done a really good job of partnering with some of the major organisations within that community, such as Transgender Victoria and so on. And I think that's been just a magnificent kind of a piece of work that's come to fruition after lots and lots of dedication by the state government and funding, of course, but also by a group that was formed to set that up. That's been a massive win. I think in Queensland just recently, legislation was passed to make it easier for people who are transgender to change their birth certificate marker, so to change their gender. Before that was done, people who were trans had to give evidence, had to show evidence from two separate doctors that they had undergone what's called gender affirmation surgery. Like, that's just so invasive and unprivate. To do that, it's just an awful thing that no one else in the community has got to do. And so the state government in Queensland recently reversed the need for that to happen. That's a massive win for the trans community in Queensland, I think. It's great. So there's little steps like that have been just really important markers. Still some work to do, I think, for people who are, there are people who are gender diverse and who are non-binary who find it really difficult to get into the workforce, and there's still some stigma associated with that. There's still stigma associated with people who are HIV positive, and I think it's just been gradual chipping away at some of those things, just educating people in the general community about there's no need for that stigma anymore. Well, there never was, and I think we're getting better at having the language to describe people who are gender diverse or gender non-conforming or who are non-binary. These people have always been around, but we haven't had the language to describe that. And now we've got, I think, both the language and we've got a growing confidence of those people to start using that language in identifying themselves, and that's been great.
Let's look at the 2023 calendar and jobs to do list. What is the one thing, if we're having this conversation in 12 months from now, do you want to tick off to have a win on in 2023? That's a hard one, I think. I think that if we could, and it's really hard to measure, but the last one would be the most important. I think that there's been a lot of work done for the L and the G letters in the LGBTIQ plus acronym. And I think that people who are bisexual still get erased. I think that, as I said, people who are, if we could go this time next year and say, looking back, well, a whole heap of people who are openly bisexual or gender diverse or non-binary, they found it easy to get jobs.
and we can somehow measure that, I think that'll be fantastic. I think one of the sad things that happened in the last 12 months or so was that the latest census just didn't even count us, so we don't know how many LGBTIQ plus people there are in Australia, and that's got impacts. I think we said in an earlier chat, for at least the next decade, by the time the next census comes out in several years, and then the results of that are analysed and policy settings are made for that, to reflect that. We're looking at a decade, so we've just lost a heap of time, which is pretty impactful on the community. I think that any, little markers like in government departments, just having markers for gender identity other than M and F, male and female, is still a bit of a chestnut. And if we could make some progress on that, it would be fantastic. But all of those things require some changes to either regulation or legislation.
Yeah, it's a good point you make about the census, because I think a lot of people who can keep the head in the sand because they don't socialise with or know anyone who is bisexual or transgender, then it's easy for them to say, well, they don't really exist. So what's all the fuss? Why are we having to do all this stuff for something that's not real? And those arguments are attempted to be prosecuted regularly, and of course without the numbers that you're talking about, those sorts of people continue to get oxygen, which is very sad. But I think the wheels are turning, and it's people like you doing the good work that you do that makes a difference. Bronte, we thank you so much for not just today, but your contribution through the year, and look forward to chatting you again next year.
Thanks, Rob. Happy Christmas to you and your listeners. Thanks. Yeah. Look forward to further chats next year.
Yeah, best wishes to you and yours as well. Yeah. Bronte Price, he's a wonderful advocate for the LGBTQI plus community. Still a lot of work to go, but I'm pretty confident the majority of our community are up and about and very accepting and understanding of the differences in our gender makeups. There's some that aren't still, and there needs to be a little bit more education and understanding, but we're definitely getting there quicker than we would have been had that marriage equality legislation not passed 5 years ago now. Can't believe that it was that long ago, but the sky is still up there. Everything is still humming along all right, and I'm sure it will continue. We're going to take a little